Hey YouTube, welcome to the video. Today we're going to do a deep dive on the kettlebell military press. So in this video we're going to cover kettlebell press form, mobility considerations that you'll need to press safely and effectively, and finally lots of my favorite kettlebell press variations so that you can get the most use out of every kettlebell that you have available. Now, of course, the kettlebell press itself has some unique benefits and techniques that make it different from a barbell or dumbbell press, but the principles and the tips and techniques that you're going to learn are going to be applicable to any sort of overhead press. As lifters, we want shoulders that are both muscular and mobile while being strong and stable. And whether you're after a classic V-taper physique or you just want to hoist heavy iron overhead with ease, you must be a serious student of the military press. So what do we mean when we say military press? Well, the general standards for a military press include lifting a weight from the shoulders to an overhead straight arm lockout while keeping strict posture. No momentum from the legs, and minimal leaning from the torso. Some classic training methods even call for the heels to remain in contact with each other in the traditional military attention stance. The kettlebell military press is most often performed with a single bell, one side at a time. The double kettlebell military press is a great option once the technique has been mastered with one bell. Nothing works the upper body musculature quite like a kettlebell press. Now, the prime movers of the press include the delts, the triceps, and to a lesser degree, the pecs and the traps. But the magic of the overhead press lies in the lockout, where you're holding the bell motionless at the top with a straight arm. And it's at this point where you have moved a weight as far from the ground and your own center of gravity as possible. And when that happens, the rest of your body is called upon to stabilize the weight. The press may be a shoulder exercise on paper, but in practice, everything from the quads, glutes, abs, lats, down to your feet, and even your non-pressing arm have roles to play in the press. Every strong kettlebell press first starts with a strong kettlebell clean. The clean is how we get a kettlebell from the ground to the shoulder rack position. And when performed correctly, a good clean primes the body and allows you to press overhead with ease. Of course, I have a full kettlebell clean guide, which I will link somewhere here around this video. So if you haven't already, do be sure to check that out. So from here, we will get into the 4 main steps that I like to keep in mind when it comes to kettlebell press technique. So step number 1 is the zip up technique. So you know how I mentioned that the press is a full body exercise? Well, this is why. The zip up technique engages every major muscle group from the feet all the way up to the shoulders in a sequential order to provide the most stable base from which you will press from. This setup is nearly invisible to the outside eye, but is the most important step for both safety and maximizing strength. And here's how you do it. After you clean the kettlebell, grip the ground with your toes while keeping a tripod foot balance. Flex the quads. Think about pulling your kneecaps up towards the hip. Squeeze the glutes as if pinching a penny with the cheeks. Brace the abs as if preparing for a punch to the gut. And tighten the pecs and the lats to squeeze into the armpit. At first, these cues may slow you down and make the press feel unnecessarily difficult. But bear in mind, you don't have to engage with 100% intensity. Just enough is just enough, and it's appropriate to scale with the weight that you're using. With practice, you'll be able to run through this internal sequence in less than a second so that you can maximize efficiency and save energy. Of course, you can practice this zip up technique without any weight in a plank position. And I'll link a video to my preferred plank variation that allows you to really practice that. Step number 2 is the press itself. So the very last cue in the zip up sequence is to really squeeze into the kettlebell handle and initiate the press upwards.
First things first is to make sure that your wrist is straight. That is bad news. Second thing is you want to load the actual weight beneath the pinky, not beneath the thumb, for 2 reasons. One, the thumb has some slack in it, right? The base of the thumb. The base of the pinky has no slack, it's just bone. Second reason is your radius on your thumb side rotates. Your ulna does not. Your ulna on your pinky side is a more stable bone to load. So if I was to open my hand, you can kind of see there that the main pressure point is on this lower quadrant right there up underneath my pinky. I'm not loading the thumb side, I'm loading the pinky side. And that comes with a slight diagonal. So that way when I press, I'm thinking about pressing through my ulna bone. It's kind of weird.
Now don't try to press too fast right off the shoulder, even if you're using a relatively light weight. You kind of want to think about pressing in first gear and then accelerating as you go through the movement. Your pressing arm will naturally arc out to the side a bit as you pass head height. The forearm should remain vertical to the ground, but don't try to press in a perfectly vertical line. As you approach lockout, the arm will drift back towards the head. Press against the kettlebell with a smooth and even force while maintaining the total body tightness you achieved in step 1. Step number 3 is the overhead lockout. Keep driving the knuckles skyward until the elbow locks out straight. The arm should settle with the bicep lining up right next to the ear. Pause for a few seconds to ensure the arm is stacked and balanced over the shoulder. Actively keep the triceps engaged to keep that arm straight. And finally, step 4 is the negative. And bringing the bell down is just as important as how you put it up. Much like the deadlift, the kettlebell press feels extra tough on that first rep because it is not preceded by a lowering or eccentric movement. Once we've performed the very first press, however, we can use an active negative technique in order to boost strength for the next rep. So what you want to think about is not allowing gravity to simply let the bell fall back to your shoulder, but rather squeeze tight and pull the bell back down to the rack position. So you will be co-contracting all the muscles around your arm, pec, lats, and shoulder. And this technique essentially winds you up and allows you to launch right into the next rep. So it's kind of a continuation of that same zip up idea. Now, before we move on from kettlebell press technique, there are 3 more subtle details that we'll go over that will help you fine tune the press. Number 1 is your foot stance. So of course, total body tension begins at the feet and how you are able to get that sense of rootedness through the ground. Now, of course, we have to clean the kettlebell before we press it. And of course, a clean typically involves swinging the weight between your legs, and that necessitates a wide sumo stance that we see in kettlebell swings and cleans. The only problem is that that particular stance is usually a bit too wide to efficiently get stability from the legs and the hips. So in general, what I recommend is finishing the clean rep and then quickly bring the feet a little bit closer together. It's usually not much, maybe just a couple inches. And then of course, some people will clean and move their feet at the same time. That's all good, just as long as you get that strong hip snap and you land in a strong clean. That's obviously what counts. And then you can experiment with where your foot placement lands. Usually I recommend right around hip width, and you can experiment with angle of turnout with the toes. Just like with the deadlift and the squat, your hip anatomy and your relative mobility is going to dictate what stance is optimal for you. Number 2 is breathing. And of course, we know that the breath has a huge impact on strength performance, especially when you are handling heavy weights. Now, here are some basic breathing guidelines for the press, and they will differ a little bit depending on how much weight you're using. So I recommend breathing in through the nose during the zip up sequence, and then holding as you initiate the press. And it's the exhalation that depends on the level of exertion that you're using in the given rep. For easy reps, I suggest a smooth nasal exhalation through the press. For more challenging reps, I recommend breathing out through the mouth as if you are blowing out birthday cake candles. Now for heavyweight or for finishing out that last rep on a hard set, that's where you're gonna wanna use a power exhalation, where you put the tongue on the roof of the mouth and you make a hiss type sound, and that's going to help keep your torso pressurized and help that grind all the way up. But no matter how tough it was to press the kettlebell, you're gonna wanna take just a couple seconds at the top to pause motionless at the lockout, take an extra breath or two, and then begin the negative. Again, in general there, you're just gonna wanna make sure that you have a belly full of air and that you're holding it through the negative, again, just to help keep that stability. Then once you're in the rack position, you reinitiate the inhalation. And number 3 is eye position. So much like our breathing pattern, where you look can have a big impact on your strength performance. Now for easy reps, probably doesn't make too much of a difference. I just suggest keeping your gaze straight ahead or slightly up. But for more challenging reps, you can utilize the flexion extension reflex to help move the kettlebell. As a general rule, looking down promotes a flexion response, while looking up does the same for extension. As it applies to the press, a downward gaze boosts your shoulder flexion strength as the weight moves off the shoulder, and an upward gaze drives extension, helping you to plow through the sticking points all the way to the lockout. An easy way to take advantage of these reflexes with appropriate timing is to simply keep your eyes on the kettlebell during the press. Now, once the bell has been locked out, you're gonna wanna bring your eyes back forward and neutral. This is just gonna help to keep your balance and keep your eyes forward until the bell has returned back to the rack position. All right, now let's talk mobility for the kettlebell press. Now, allow me to state the obvious. You need proper shoulder mobility in order to safely press a kettlebell overhead. But we're not just looking at shoulder mobility here for the press. Really, we've got to consider the hips, the core, the T-spine, and the shoulders working together as a unit to effectively and efficiently press overhead. Now, between hours of computer and desk work combined with hard physical training, most of us deal with some amount of hip and shoulder tightness. So just a little bit of warm-up and prep work can go a long way. Now, obviously, we don't have the time here to do a deep dive on mobility in general, but these are a few exercises that I use myself and with clients that are great bang for your buck mobility drills that I suggest incorporating into your pressing routines. First up are half kneeling banded shoulder dislocates and around the world circles. These circle patterns have long been used by Olympic weightlifters to loosen up the shoulders. Pulling out against the band turns this into an active stretch, requiring strength in awkward positions. The half kneeling position also gives you a great hip flexor and quad stretch. Just be sure to keep the downside glute tight with a slight tailbone tuck. Next up is a simple side plank where we integrate some shoulder movement. Strong shoulders can only exist on top of a strong core. Remember the synergy that comes with every muscle group supporting its neighbors? Well, the obliques run along the side of the body and together with the lats provide our lateral stability and support upright posture. Waking up the obliques with a side plank is a simple way to boost shoulder function. Next up, we have weighted dead bugs. Now, the classic dead bug is a great way to train the integration of shoulder movement with core stability. And of course, there's the added benefit of coordinating with the hips as well. Like the side plank variation above, focus on keeping a stiff core to prevent unnecessary spinal movement while dynamically moving the limbs. Maintain nasal breathing and a relaxed face. Last up is my all-time favorite stretch and one that really helped me in a bind when I tweaked my shoulder right before a big certification weekend. And that is the pretzel stretch. Much like our first opener, this drill hits the shoulders and the hips simultaneously. The pretzel boosts shoulder mobility not just by stretching out the pecs and the biceps, but through thoracic spine rotation. Our shoulder blades live in the T-spine area, and naturally, if the T-spine is stiff or immobile, the shoulders are doomed to the same. Hold each side for 2 to 3 minutes. Relax the shoulders down to the ground with each long exhale. Now, what all these mobility drills have in common is a focus on shoulder control in concert with the rest of the body. We're not isolating parts here, we are integrating parts. And that's really what the press is all about. And let's take a look at some top kettlebell press variations. So once you've mastered the standard one-arm technique, you can use some of these variations to progress your training and explore the different ways the press can be expressed. First up is the double kettlebell press. All the same clean and press techniques apply when using double bells. Just note that pressing 2 bells at once will eliminate the subtle side lean that you enjoy when pressing 1 bell at a time. And though you may lean back slightly, the double press does typically require more mobility through both of the shoulders. Next up is the seesaw press. This double kettlebell press involves equal but opposite movement through the arms. Begin by cleaning 2 kettlebells and press just 1 overhead. As the top arm comes down, begin to press up with the other. Move each arm at the same controlled speed, and they should meet at the same level right around the top of the head. Now, my very favorite kettlebell exercise is the bottoms up press. Instead of having the kettlebell rest on the back of the arm, the bell is held upside down with the bottom base facing skyward. The bottoms up press creates extra long leverage with the weight and introduces a balance component into the press. These together require more grip strength and rotator cuff stability than a traditional press. Now, another fun way to progress the is to give the non-pressing arm something to do. And for the suitcase press variation, you'll press as usual while holding another kettlebell, usually heavier, down by your side. The extra weight will challenge your core stability and your shoulder independence. Clean your press bell before carefully deadlifting the other. elevating the Suitcase side will make this easier. And in that same vein as the Suitcase press, we have the Liberty press. Here you will hold a kettlebell statically overhead with one arm while dynamically pressing with the other. Clean 2 bells, press one side up and hold it there. Really focus on keeping that arm straight with hard triceps. Press with the other side for reps as usual. Now keep both weights light when you first try this variation, as your stabilizers will fatigue quickly here. Now we know that as a full body lift, the press begins with the feet, and the sense of stability that you get from the ground influences everything else up the kinetic chain. And it's for this simple reason that any change in leg or foot position will affect the press itself. When we go from a standing to a kneeling position, we compromise much of that lower body stability and thus increase the demands on the glutes and core. The single arm version can be performed with either arm, but is traditionally trained on the high knee side for more direct carryover to the Turkish getup. And here with the Z press, we take the legs completely out of the equation by sitting directly on the ground in a wide split stance. Keep the glutes and abs tight to support an upright posture and resist any lean back. Now, as you can tell, the kettlebell press can be performed in many dozens of ways, and the press pattern offers more options for variation than any other primary lifting pattern. Explore these main variants to creatively progress your training while getting maximal use out of every kettlebell in your collection. All right, and that does it for the video. You're definitely going to want to check out the article version of my guide to the kettlebell press, which I will have linked in the description below, where you'll also learn a bit more about how to program the kettlebell press, and you will also be able to check out a specialized pressing program that I have for you there. So, as always, appreciate you watching. If you like the video, do give it a thumbs up and subscribe, and all the best in your training. We'll see you in the next video.